Who are the best GMs in the NFL? What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch here, back with another NFL tier list. You asked for it, you got it. I am ranking every NFL GM from the worst to the best into tiers in this video. All 32 NFL GMs, no matter if they're old, if they're new. I'm going to give you my thoughts on every single one. It's about that time of the year where GMs are making key decisions for the future of their franchises. When it comes to the draft coming up, these GMs are going to have to make some decisions. And there has been some trends lately in the NFL that has changed the way that team building works. These GMs are at the operation table. These are the guys that create the champions. So, in this video, let's talk about some general managers. Before I rank every general manager and tier rank every general manager, don't forget to spike that like button. Let's try to get 100 likes once again on this video so that we can keep coming with the tier list. Let me know in the comment section below which tier list you would like to see next. I'm open to really any ideas. We have covered the quarterback position. We have done weapons. We have done head coaches. We have done wide receivers. We have even done all-time tier lists, but I'm having a lot of fun doing them, and they're very easy to do. So let me know in the comment section below what you guys want to see next, and don't forget to spike that like button. Also, you could follow me and the channel at TheBottomLineView on Instagram and at Mitch Mullaney on Twitter, where I'm giving my thoughts on the NFL on Twitter all the time, and we post some exclusive content over there on Instagram. So make sure to follow me and to follow the channel on Instagram and Twitter. Okay, so let's get it rolling, and let's say hello to the people in the chat. As always, we've got some nice people in the chat like Natasha, who says, "Hi, Bottom Line View family. Please remember to spike the like button and feel free to subscribe as well." I like how she puts spike the like button in caps. That is very much appreciated. Basketball and Football Moment says, "Hey, Mitch, what's going on, man?" Jeremy says, "Joey D is #1 Jets Nation" in the chat. And Josh says he's good with the current Panthers GM, who kind of just started, but we're going to talk about that. And he says that Joe Douglas got 2 first-rounders for Jamal Adams, so that's pretty good. Brian Dayball is also in the chat. Nice to see you, Brian Dayball. I'm sure you're preparing for the draft right now. Let me know what you're looking at in that draft, Mr. Brian Dayball. All right. And, of course, my guy Big Data is in the chat. Okay, let's get to the tier list. All right. Hold on. We've got the tier list. We've got the multiple tiers here. From superstar to great to good to potential okay and bad. So to describe each tier, we begin with the superstar tier. These are the GMs that they set trends. They do things their own way. They have great control over the draft. They have great control over free agency. They have a cohesive vision for their football team. And they make the right decisions when it comes to letting go of a player, extending a player, trading for a player, cutting a player, whatever it may be. This guy knows what he's doing, and he is one of the best in the game. The great GM is a very, very capable GM who is probably strong in one area, but is maybe not as well-rounded as the superstar GMs, or maybe not as consistent or have as much longevity as those guys. The good GMs are a little bit more flawed and inconsistent. They sometimes have home run picks and home run signings, and sometimes they completely whiff and completely miss. And they've had track records that suggest they've had success, but they've also, you could look at it another way and suggest that they've also not had success in other moments. Potential are mostly the newer guys that I think can be very good at their jobs and that I see a lot of potential in. Very straightforward there. okay are just the okay GMs. You probably want better, but you also understand that they're not that bad at their job. They're not single-handedly destroying your football team. So they're just average. They're okay. Maybe they just aren't very aggressive. They don't do a lot. They kind of are okay with where they're at. And then the bad GM is one that single-handedly ruins your operation. He ruins your team. He's terrible at drafting. He's just never had a good draft pick. These guys are really, really bad at their jobs, okay? That's the way that I could put it. So, the GM tier list, and GMs are interesting because GMs are very important in the NFL, but not a lot of people actually know what they look like. So when I do a tier list here, you're probably going to see quite a few people that you don't even know like who they are. So we're going to go over it. And even myself, like I know all the names and stuff, but I do not know all of the faces. So I'm kind of like still a little lost, and I'm somebody that knows the entire NFL, cover it every day. So like that's just kind of how GMs are in this league. So let's get to the first GM on the list, which is Brandon Beane of the Buffalo Bills. Also, play along. I'm going to pull up the chat right now. Play along with me at home and let me know in the comments where you would rank your favorite GM, or as we go along, if you know who they are and know what team and you like them or don't like them, let me know in the comments as well. Okay. All right. Having trouble here pulling up the comments and then also pulling everything up that I want. So there we go. Let's go with Brandon Beane first. So Brandon Beane, I think, has been phenomenal the last few years since he's really became the GM there in Buffalo. I think he has been one of the best GMs in the NFL. I think he does a great job with draft picks. First off, he got the big draft pick right? Josh Allen. It might have taken a little bit of time, 1 or 2 seasons, for Josh Allen to become an all-pro caliber quarterback, but he hit a home run with that one. And that is going to set himself up long-term to be a very successful general manager, which he's done a very good job of supporting Josh Allen with a quality roster. Stephon Diggs was a massive move that was probably worth it at the end of the day. I definitely think that Brandon Beane is somebody that is maybe not a trendsetter, but is just very smart. He goes about his business mostly drafting to build his team on the defensive and offensive sides of the football. He's done a good job with most of his picks. He does a pretty good job in filling in with trades and free agents where he has to. The big move this offseason was getting Von Miller, which I think could catapult the Buffalo Bills to the Super Bowl this year, which would be a huge move for him. Obviously, they haven't had a ton of playoff success just yet in Buffalo, but I don't think that's necessarily the general manager's fault, necessarily. I think from where they were when he started and where they are now, they are looked at as one of the most stable, consistent, and best franchises in the NFL in the current modern day of 2022. So that being said, I think that he is one of the best general managers in the NFL, and I'm going to put him into the superstar tier. He's actually one of the lone people that I feel like NFL fans actually know who he is, so that does say a lot as well, but it's in a good way, so that's a good thing. Chris Grier is up next. Chris Grier of the Miami Dolphins, who's been around for a bit for the Dolphins. He's been really inconsistent. Now, I will say about Chris Grier, he understood the assignment when it came to tanking and it came to getting a lot of draft picks to rebuild his roster, and that was kind of the philosophy there the last couple of years, 2018, 2019 sort of range there, where they were trying to kind of lose out and get a good quarterback and try to fill this team with young talent. Now, I think Grier has kind of been super inconsistent in terms of his hits and his misses. He's missed in the biggest area you can miss. Like, he literally missed so bad that an all-pro quarterback was picked right after he picked Tua. So, like, that's a really bad that's a really bad miss right there. You go with Tua, who a lot of people liked at the time, but still, like, you missed out on Justin Herbert. So that is definitely a huge, huge flaw in his resume. But he's also hit on a few other picks, mostly in the draft. They've been kind of weak. I know Brian Flores was involved in that process as well. So the draft stuff has kind of been hit and miss. Like, they've got a few good players. I think Jalen Phillips was a good pick. Javon Holland was a good pick. Those were last year. They've had good picks. I think Wilkins and those guys are solid. Picking up Byron Jones in free agency was good, but like, you had to throw a lot of money there. They finally fixed the offensive line. I think they've done a lot of good this offseason, where they've been able to pick up Tyreek Hill, even though that's a lot of money and a lot of draft picks and assets. You know, you get Tyreek Hill, you get Teron Armstead, you pick up Chase Edmonds, a lot of moves that I really do like, but I think the fact that he hasn't really been able to fix the offensive line for 3 or 4 years, which is a long sample size, the fact that the quarterback, the most important position, is still a huge flaw on the team, the fact that he kind of pushed a good coach out the door in terms of that ownership, GM kind of relationship, is definitely something that hinders him and hurts him in my eyes. So I think he is like, okay, I'm going to say. I don't love him. I don't think he's bad, though. Like, he's done enough good things for me to suggest that he's not one of the worst general managers in the NFL. And it's kind of hard to be an absolutely atrocious general manager when you have all these draft picks and you have all this money. So I think it's kind of the balancing act of he hit on some things, he missed on other things. That's going to happen naturally. But I think the fact that he missed on quarterback, huge in my opinion, is the fact that I can't put him any higher than just okay. So Chris Grier, the offensive line, the quarterback, those are things that have definitely held him back from being potentially looked at as a very good general manager, because he had the right process, but the results weren't exactly there. Then we've got Mr. Douglas from the New York Jets in the front office, who has recently begun the job. I believe he started last year, or maybe the year before, but I want to say it was last year. I could be wrong about that. With Robert Saleh, I think they teamed up. Maybe it was the year before, but correct me, Jets fans, let me know. But Douglas, I really like so far. I think he's done a very quality job from a roster that was really terrible a couple of years ago. You know, the end of the Adam Gase regime was atrocious, and Douglas has been able to quickly kind of turn that around, I feel, in a positive direction. I understand the Jets aren't looked at as a Super Bowl contender or anything like that, but when you look at the roster talent that he has acquired and he has signed and he has drafted, it's a pretty impressive list. First off, I do like Zach Wilson. I think eventually he will be a good quarterback. So I like that pick at the time. This is showing my bias, but we don't have enough real detail and understanding of what Zach Wilson is going to be just yet. But I do think he's going to be good. The wide receiver position has been a little bit of a hit and miss. He did put big money on Corey Davis, but Corey Davis is a good receiver, not a great receiver, so maybe a slight miss there, but he got hurt last year, so we'll see how he develops this year. I think Elijah Moore was a good pick. The offensive line specifically has been a great job from Douglas. Getting Elijah Vera-Tucker, great player. Getting left tackle Mekhi Becton, despite the injuries, great draft pick. So those two picks have been home runs in my opinion. Picking up Lincoln Tomlinson I think is going to be great for them. So he's fixed a really bad offensive line. Defensive line wise, Carl Lawson got unlucky there, but he's a good player. I think that will be good for them. Quinnen Williams is a beast. I think he might have drafted him. Regardless, he's on the roster. John Franklin Myers as well is young, who he might have had a hand on. Again, I don't really quite remember, but he's built the defensive line and offensive lines, and that's been kind of his thing so far, and he's done a good job with that. And then this offseason, he went out there and he signed a Whitehead, he signed a Reed to help his secondary. So I think overall, from the vision of a football team and what he's looking for and what he's trying to acquire, now he has multiple picks high in the draft. I think he's doing a really good job so far. So I'm going to put him into, honestly, the good category. It might be a little bit bold and a little bit early, but I'm going to put him in the good category because I don't think he's missed very often in his first couple of years as a GM. Then we've got Bill Belichick for, of course, the New England Patriots, who, yes, is the general manager of the Patriots, in case anybody didn't know that for whatever reason. Bill Belichick is really tough to evaluate because obviously he has 6 Super Bowls as a head coach and a general manager, and he has some sort of, responsibility for that. But I think it's much more difficult to build a team when your team doesn't have Tom Brady on it, where Tom Brady can make every kind of move look good, even if it's bad. And he can kind of save you from making bad draft pick after bad draft pick after bad draft pick. But at the same time, when you pick last in the draft, when you pick bottom of the first round all the time, that's also really difficult to pick good players. So Belichick's draft history has been hit and miss. He's had years where it's been excellent. He's had years where it really was terrible. Specifically, the wide receiver position has been atrocious over the years. But there are things that he does really well. He picks up undrafted corners like nobody's business. Jonathan Jones, Malcolm Butler, J.C. Jackson, like the list goes on there. Defensive linemen, he's pretty good at. Linebackers, he's always had a good feel for. Just generally defense, he does a pretty good job with. Also coaching them up and understanding which players he can coach. Offense, he's good on the offensive line. Everywhere else is a little hit and miss. Obviously, he hit on Gronk. He hit on guys like Edelman and things like that. But he's been a little hit and miss on offense. Obviously, Tom Brady, which was kind of a fluke, to be honest. But recently, he's done a good job of getting the Patriots back to a point where they were able to make the playoffs, but I am wondering now, one offseason from last offseason where he spent the most money of any team, how that's actually going to function and operate long term, because he spent a lot of money on good football players, but not great football players. And even though it gave him a better floor for his football team, it didn't necessarily push the ceiling of what your team wants to be. So Belichick is very tricky. I am going to put Belichick in the great category. I think currently he's a very good general manager, but there's still a lot of head-shaking decisions that do confuse me sometimes, like trading Stephon Gilmore for a 5th, or like trading away Shaq Mason. But he still makes quality draft picks, quality signings, so I can't, and he builds a team fairly well, so I can't really say he's not still a very good general manager. I do think that he has benefited, though, greatly from just simply having the greatest football player that's ever played. So Bill Belichick is great. Then we've got Colbert, who is the general manager of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kevin Colbert is actually going to retire very soon, and they're looking for a replacement for him down the road. I don't even know if it's going to happen after the draft. If there's any Steelers fans here, let me know. But I think that he's going to retire rather after the draft or next year. I'm not exactly sure. But he's been around for a long time, and he's been there for basically the entire Ben Roethlisberger stretch. So he's done a good job specifically with drafting. I think the Steelers have also really done a good job drafting players, specifically defensive players, defensive linemen, edge rushers, sometimes secondary players, but more so those guys. Then you look at the offensive line. Typically when they draft them, they're good players. Skill players, wide receiver has been an excellent area for them over the years. They haven't really had to deal with quarterback for many seasons. But I do feel like he has missed the boat sometimes on terms of being aggressive in free agency. Sometimes he's a little bit too conservative. He doesn't make enough splashes and really team-changing moves from that perspective. And there's been stretches throughout the Steelers' history where they've been weak in a particular spot for a very long time. Like, I just recall corner and secondary being a very weak point for about 3 seasons in a row there in Pittsburgh, where he really couldn't solve it. Offensive line recently has been a major weakness for them. But there's good things and bad things. So I'm going to put him into the good category for his work over his career. And I think he's been a quality GM that has consistently produced talented rosters and good football teams, but he's also not been able to kind of take the Steelers over the top in terms of some big acquisitions that might, really change the franchise. What's going on, everybody in the chat? Don't forget to Gronk spike that like button, guys. Would appreciate it big time. Next up, and if you want another tier list, make sure we get to 100 likes. Tobin of the Cincinnati Bengals is next up. So he is actually technically the player personnel guy and not the general manager, as the owner is actually listed as the general manager there, Mr. Brown, Paul Brown's son. But we've got Tobin as the player personnel guy, and I think he's actually done a really good job in recent seasons with the Cincinnati Bengals roster, particularly or specifically Joe Burrow is one of them, which I'm sure he had some sort of influence on that draft pick. Jamar Chase, which those two picks have changed this franchise completely. And then on top of that, the free agency signings that he's had have been very impressive. I mean, Trey Hendrickson was a great pickup, right? Somebody like that. Re-signing Sam Hubbard was a solid move. DJ Reader ended up being a big move for them last year. I think looking at even secondary moves that they've made, Mike Hilton. I think he's made a lot of nice free agency signings for a franchise that typically was very lackluster in free agency. This offseason, he really understood the assignment of being able to go out there and sign a bunch of offensive linemen to help his young quarterback and protect him. The draft pick of T. Higgins was a good one. Joe Mixon being on the team is a very talented running back and not really overspending for him. So I think he's done a really good job as of late, and he's probably one of the more underrated names in the league because not a lot of actually people know who he is because he's not actually the general manager in title. But I think that Tobin is... I'm going to say he's a good general manager. I think he's done a really good job recently. You could argue that he's great, but I don't know if he has enough of a track record yet to suggest that he's great. But I would suggest that he is good for sure. And then we've got Andrew Berry of the Cleveland Browns. Andrew Berry is like NFL nerds' favorite GM in the league. They love his analytical approach. They love the money ball strategy of things. They love the way that he sees the game. He seems like a smart guy. But at the end of the day, you've got to assess the results. I feel like Berry is good and bad. I think he's done a really good job at creating a very strong roster, but his roster has not had a lot of success, if that makes sense. So, and I don't think that's really his fault, though, right? I think he might have made not the greatest decision, or they didn't make the greatest decision in Cleveland to get Baker Mayfield. But I think Berry has put a team around Baker Mayfield that was actually very, very good and arguably one of the more talented rosters in the NFL on the offensive line. Phenomenal job. Doing the right things, trying to get guys like Odell Beckham Jr., bringing in these type of players. The Cleveland has tried to do the right things, but the process has not always led to results. Defensively, like last offseason, acquiring a bunch of secondary players to fix that was the right idea, but I don't think, again, process and results have to be separated. So he's had a really good process, and oftentimes it's led to results, but in other areas it's missed. And a lot of that has because they really didn't nail the quarterback position there in Cleveland, which, again, is not all his fault, but now they go with Deshaun Watson, which could be a great move. It could be a home run. It could also be very dangerous and very risky. So he's somebody that's really tough. I honestly want to put him into the potential category, and Big Data is correct. John Dorsey drafted Baker Mayfield. I forgot the name of who drafted him, but So that's really Andrew Berry who put the team around him and not necessarily drafted him, but he tried his best with putting a team around Baker Mayfield. I'm going to put him in potential, and the reason I'm putting him in potential, this is why, okay? He'll move up greatly if Deshaun Watson ends up turning his personal story around and ends up being a great quarterback in this league and carrying the Browns to great success. But if the Deshaun Watson thing does not work out, Andrew Berry is going to get fired, and that's not even like a question whatsoever. So he's really like out there for making the decisions with the Deshaun Watson thing, because Andrew Berry basically got forced into a corner of, we don't have a quarterback. We have this good team that's ready to win now, and we're doing everything in our basically that we can to get a quarterback, and they just did whatever they could. Didn't matter what they gave up, didn't matter the money, like they were just like, whatever it takes to get Deshaun Watson, whatever it takes. So his reputation's on the line based on that move alone. We'll see if that works for him or if it doesn't, but he's done a solid job with the team, maybe a little bit overrated in terms of his results, but I have always enjoyed some of the moves and what he's tried to attempt to do. Next up, we've got, I believe that's Jon Robinson. I'm just trying to figure out all of these faces. But that's Jon Robinson of the Tennessee Titans. I think Jon Robinson, who I believe is initially a Patriots guy, is actually super underrated. Nobody really knows who he is, but he has built the Tennessee Titans team over the last 4 or 5 seasons where they've had pretty good success, measuring back to the Marcus Mariota days onto the Ryan Tannehill days. And I think his success speaks because he's had success going to the playoffs, having some playoff runs. Obviously, Mike Vrabel brought them to the first seed last year, and I think he had an influence over hiring Mike Vrabel, so that goes on his resume as well. Picking up Ryan Tannehill to back up Marcus Mariota to potentially take his place was an awesome move at the end of the day. Drafting A.J. Brown was a spectacular move. Some of the defensive moves that they've made, like Jeffrey Simmons, for example, have been great moves. Harold Landry was another nice move. So they've had some nice draft picks. They've had some nice signings. They've also had some misses, like trading for Julio Jones wasn't exactly his greatest move ever. But I do feel he is pretty good and pretty underrated and doesn't get enough talk or credit for what he's been able to do with Tennessee, kind of taking them from an average football team to a pretty consistent playoff team. So I think that he is a good general manager in this league. Then we've got Nick Caserio. Nick Caserio is really difficult to figure out because he's basically spent his entire regime trying to clean up the mess that was Bill O'Brien and the Houston Texans before him. So that being said, there's not a lot to go off of other than obviously his Patriots days, which I'm not really going to take into account here because a lot of that was Bill Belichick. And then also the early days of Houston. I think what he's done that is wise is sign a lot of players to one-year contracts to see who would stick on his team. I think actually looking back at it, the Davis Mills pick was not a half bad pick whatsoever. I think he's done a good job with some of the defensive signings that he's made. I think he's done a good job in keeping Brandon Cooks happy and keeping him around. That's not a bad move. But I just think there's a lot of drama in Houston that takes away from his potential greatness of what he could do there, and I don't know how that's going to hinder him in the future. But now that he has all these draft picks and all these assets to rebuild his team, we're truly going to be able to see what he can do with the Houston Texans. So he's kind of a question mark. We don't really know. I'm going to put him into potential because I actually think he's somebody that now we're going to see the door is open for him to improve the Houston Texans from the ground up, and it's Nick Caserio's playground, so we'll see how it goes. Chris Ballard is up next. Chris Ballard is one of the more famous, I would say, general managers in the NFL, and it's mostly due to reputation based on how people in the NFL and NFL media talks about him. He's one of the general managers that you'll hear a lot from in terms of, like, just people love to talk about him. I don't know why, but Chris Ballard is somebody that's looked at as a prestigious name in this league as a general manager. Now, I will say this. I am not the biggest Chris Ballard fan. I think he does a good job drafting a lot of the times. I think he does a good job with offensive linemen. I think he does a good job with front seven players on defense. But I think he's kind of overrated because he's never made the Colts an actual great team. He's made them playoff teams, flirting with playoff teams. He's never been able to get quarterback right for whatever reason. Andrew Luck, that kind of screwed him, I'm going to be honest, but he hasn't fixed that yet. It's been 3 or 4 years. He hasn't fixed quarterback, right? He's made some great picks. Darius Leonard, trading for DeForest Buckner was a great pick, or a great pickup. Michael Pittman was a nice move. Jonathan Taylor, obviously. So there's been some really nice draft picks, but his free agency game and his trade game has very much lacked across the board for a number of seasons. He's a team and a franchise that's had a ton of money, and they never really seem to spend it. So I feel like he's kind of overrated, to be honest with you. But that being said, he's still good, if not great. Right? So I think he's similar to Belichick, where he's really strong in certain areas, but he's also kind of overrated in other areas and inconsistent, and there's something lacking from making him an actual superstar that he is kind of touted to be. So he is in the great category for me, not quite a superstar because of what I said. Now we've got George Paton, who's up next. George Paton is the general manager of the Denver Broncos, who is a relatively recent addition to the front office, but I think so far, so freaking good. I mean, look at Russell Wilson. Getting him was spectacular. Some of his draft picks have been very nice in recent seasons. I feel like some of the signings they've made over the last 1 or 2 years have been really good. I think he's done a good job with the defense overall. And this is look at this roster. I mean, he's done a really good job at manufacturing a really nice roster and potentially even a championship roster. And all they were really missing was the quarterback. So at the end of the day, I think George Paton has done a very, very admirable job with the Broncos. I'm going to put him into the good category. I don't think we've quite seen enough from him quite yet to suggest he's great or a superstar, but he's on his trajectory to getting there. If he picks up a playoff berth this year and a lot of buzz for some of his acquisitions and obviously the Russell Wilson move, then that's going to boost him up in the minds of many. So he's in the good category for me. Next up, we've got Brett Veach of the Kansas City Chiefs, who is obviously another general manager that's probably more known just because he's the general manager of the Kansas City Chiefs. He's kind of, I would say, I don't want to say he's already peaked, but it felt like he was at the top of his game around 2018, 2019, and since then, he has seriously lacked in his decision-making and has definitely almost felt like he went on vacation for a couple of years. I had a lot of respect for what he was able to do in building this team, really with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, that draft pick was an absolute home run. I'm sure Andy Reid has some sort of influence on the picks that are made on this team, but I think he's done a good job remanufacturing that offensive line and surrounding Patrick Mahomes with a good offensive line. They got rid of Tyreek Hill, who got traded, and we're going to see what he can do with all those draft picks. It's a huge year for them, and next year will be a big year for them in how they are perceived moving forward for the future of this Chiefs franchise. Because at one point they were billed as a dynasty, and I want to say that part of the reason they weren't able to become that is because the general manager lacked in a couple of picks. They weren't. He really, this is the big areas, right? Defensive line. Frank Clark was a terrible move. Ended up being absolutely atrocious. Obviously, keeping Chris Jones was a must, but every other move on the defensive line, besides maybe signing a veteran like Melvin Ingram, didn't really work out for them. Jerron Reed was a miss. So the defensive line, big-time misses across the board. Linebacker, iffy. Secondary, Tyrann Mathieu was a great move, but he's now gone. But that was a great move for them, to make them a championship team. Cornerbacks, I think he's done a good job with finding kind of under the radar gems at that position, like a Snead, for example, who's going to be their best corner this year. And then you look at the offensive side of the football, Obviously, some of the guys they have, obviously Kelsey, Hill, Mahomes, those are superstars, and some of the guys that they have on the offensive line are nice quality pickups. But Orlando Brown was not the greatest trade. Looking back at it now, we'll see how it functions moving forward. But so far, he hasn't really been worth the price. Then we look at Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round. That was a terrible draft pick. Mecole Hardman so far has been not a bust, but a miss. So we'll see how this Valdez-Scantling Juju business goes about. But I think he kind of peaked already, which is strange to say. So I'm going to say that Veach is, I want to say that he is like a good GM because he's had enough success for me to say he's good, but he has certainly missed a ton over the last couple of years. So I'm going to say he's good. I do think that the Tyreek Hill decision, while it makes them worse this year, it does probably make them better in the long run, or at least gives them the opportunity to. So that's positive. Dave Ziegler of the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, so a lot of people will just stick him in the potential category because he's a first-year general manager. But what has he done so far? So this is rare because we've already seen a first-year general manager do a lot of stuff. So Dave Ziegler has, traded for Davante Adams. Defensively, Chandler Jones. A number of pickups, depth-wise, that I really appreciated. At the corner position, specifically a linebacker position with Jayon Brown. They have basically reworked their defense from the opposite side of the spectrum in a Gus Bradley scheme to a Patriot-type defensive scheme in one offseason, shifting all these players, letting some guys go, signing others. And then offensively, he's been able to re-sign Derek Carr to a pretty manageable contract, get him a number one target, arguably the best receiver in the game, and set up his head coach, an offensive guy with enough weapons and tools to be successful. That's ultimately what a general manager is asked to do. So, looking at it right now, the guy has had a superstar offseason. But we really can't say that he is a superstar quite yet. So as much as I would like to put him there as a Patriot guy, I'll have to put him into the potential category because he just hasn't done enough yet. But he certainly has had a great start. There's no doubt. So next up, after Dave Ziegler, we got Lenny B with the super chat. So before we get to the next guy, we've got Lenny B, who says, no man should have all that power. Raiders on top. Okay, so next is Tom Telesco of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Tom Telesco, another guy that I think is super underrated for what he's been able to do, specifically in the draft, but over the last 3 or 4 years, I think he's hit home run after home run after home run in the first round. I mean, you look at picks like Joey Bosa, Mike Williams, Justin Herbert, Derwin James. I mean, these are phenomenal picks in the first round. Teams don't go 5 or 6 years in a row with that type of first round pedigree. And then on top of that, this offseason's been great. He's setting up his defensive coach with the pieces that he needs, right? Defensive lineman in the inside, Sebastian Joseph Day, for example. Obviously, Khalil Mack, J.C. Jackson, who I thought was kind of a steal for them. Then we look at all the players that he's drafted. On top of that, Asante Samuel Jr. I'm not sure if he had a hand on Austin Eckler, but, I mean, Austin Eckler is there. And then Rashawn Slater too in the first round. I mean, that's another friggin' home run. So you got that one. So, I mean, this guy has been phenomenal at the top of the draft where it matters. He's been really good as of late in free agency. And he set the Chargers up as one of the most talented teams in the NFL. I can't really ask for more than what he has given us the last couple of years. So even though he's not really known, I think he's a great general manager. I mean, Like, when you can hit at that rate at the top of the draft, you're doing something right. And then on top of that, his recent success in free agency, I think, is just phenomenal. So I'm going to put him in the great category. Trent Baalke is next. Trent Baalke, I just, straight up, he's bad. I mean, he's just a bad general manager. He's had about 1 year in Jacksonville where he was good, and that was 2017, and that was mostly fluky. Like, he kind of just hit a home run with a generational defense. Other than that, I believe he picked Blake Bortles, and then he also extended Blake Bortles for some reason. Like, he never watched him play. Obviously, him and Urban Meyer were together and picking Travis Etienne. I have no idea what that was. He might have picked the wrong quarterback last year, even though nobody can really blame him. But he's had some really bad decisions in free agency, spending money on players that it makes no sense. He's handing out okay players huge contracts, and numerous times finding the wrong scheme fit for his coaches. So I think he's probably the worst general manager in the NFL right now because he has a sustained track record of being terrible. So I think he's the worst general manager probably in the NFL right now. Now we've got Eric DeCosta of Baltimore, who is highly touted as one of the best in the league, and he's another guy that a lot of diehard NFL fans will recognize and understand as a good general manager. I do think he's a tad overrated at times for his draft. You know, it's funny how it works, and I almost feel like the media is definitely given a little bit of some cash for their grades at times, because I feel like the Ravens always end up with an A in the draft, but their roster isn't necessarily always an A or an A+, which you kind of wonder how that works. But at the end of the day, Eric DeCosta is pretty darn good at what he does. First off, Lamar Jackson was a phenomenal pick. It might have been the biggest steal we've seen in a draft in quite some time. To get a quarterback MVP superstar as the 32nd pick in the draft is nuts. And then you look at some of the picks he's made on the offensive line, as well as pickups, like just a small one like Kevin Ziegler, which was actually really good last year. Running backs have been hit and miss. I thought he did a good job with Mark Ingram. Obviously, there was some carryover there with Ozzie Newsome. So Ozzie Newsome kind of taught him the ropes, and Ozzie Newsome, I believe, still has some sort of influence here. But Eric DeCosta is the main guy in decision-making. But the receivers, Marquise Brown, you know, maybe you could say that was a flawed pick because you should have taken DK Metcalf or A.J. Brown. Like, you could say that, but Marquise Brown is good, so I'm not necessarily going to say he's bad. Mark Andrews was a phenomenal pick for sure. And then you've got defensively guys like Marlon Humphrey. And I think overall, the free agency and trade game is really where Eric DeCosta has done a good job at finding value. And like, just for example, Marcus Peters trade, which ended up being a really good trade for them. Those type of moves that I think have been very nice. So I think that he is a great GM. I think he's one of the best in the game. I don't know if I'm going to put him in the beans alone right now. I think that because DeCosta has been a little bit inconsistent in terms of, you just look at like the edge position, and I guess they've lost some talent, but they're going through another kind of retooling at the moment. So I want to see how he looks in the draft this year. Then maybe he can move back up to superstar. But I think at one point, maybe 2 years ago, he was looked at as a superstar GM. But I think he's flirting with it. But I don't know if I can quite put him there right now. Okay, so I think we're going to get to our next superstar, and that is Jason Licht. I think Jason Licht is one of the best general managers in the NFL, because I think over the past 2 to 3 years, he's had the most talented roster in the NFL. He obviously had a major influence on bringing in Tom Brady. He has had great draft picks, at the wide receiver position, at defense. I think he's done a great job. So just look at that one draft. Like, the first draft that they had that won them the Super Bowl, practically, right? They had Tom Brady in free agency. Tom Brady kind of helped there as the GM, bringing in guys like Gronk and Leonard Fournette and those guys, and Antonio Brown. So Tom Brady is also kind of the co-GM here. But Jason Licht, you almost include Tom Brady in here. Jason Licht with the Tristan Wirfs pick and the Antoine Winfield Jr. pick, that was phenomenal. Like that year, that kind of catapulted them to the Super Bowl. And I think he's had some nice picks and some nice free agency signings as well. I just think generally he does a good job, like even a savvy trade like getting Shaq Mason from the Patriots this offseason for very limited amount. He fully understands the assignment of being a win-now mode general manager, and therefore he is put in a position to be successful and to have success, but he's had a lot of success. And I would argue that he isn't the reason they didn't go back-to-back. Some of it was probably injuries and some of it was coaching, and I think Jason Licht, along with Tom Brady, has made the Bucs what they are right now. So I would put him into the superstar category for sure. Okay, let me know if I'm missing anybody that should be in superstar in your opinion. Definitely looking to hear your guys' opinion. If you haven't already, make sure you do spike that like button. So next up, we've got the new Carolina Panthers general manager, who is Scott Fitterer. He's brand new, so I basically have almost nothing to go off of. But I will say that this offseason and this free agency, which I believe he had the control of because he was hired in January, he at least had some control in the signings and the movement. But I do understand that some of the scouting and stuff have taken place before that. But I do think that he did a good job this offseason, this free agency overall. Besides getting a quarterback, I think it was drastically improved from last offseason, right? So I think that when you look at last offseason and what they did on the offensive line, and then you compare it to this offseason and what they did on the offensive line, and just I think they made quality signings this offseason, and I think they made crap signings last offseason. So that probably speaks to his impact already. So I think he's done a decent job so far. We'll see what happens in the draft. We need to know what's going to go on with the quarterback position. He wasn't really in charge there for the Sam Darnold move. So he's definitely somebody that I just don't have enough information on. But I'm going to put him into the potential because I don't know if you could criticize him yet, but we'll see what happens. So I think he's kind of, we don't know. We just don't have enough information. I want to see what happens in the draft. I want to see if he can nail the quarterback position at some point down the road, and that will kind of give us our decision on where we can actually rank him. But so far, not horrible. Not horrible. Okay, next we've got the guy that I've got to definitely check how to pronounce his name. The new Minnesota Vikings general manager. This is my best shot. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. No, redo that. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. Mensah. We're going to go with Mensah. Adofo-Mensah. That is what I'm going to go with right there. Okay? That's the new Vikings general manager. So far, so good. Okay? So far, so good. I think he's done a good job. Bringing in somebody like Zadarius Smith, I think, was a great pickup. I think bringing in Chandon Sullivan, I think, understands what they're going to run on defense and understanding, who's going to fit on their defense. I think so far, so good. So far, so savvy. Offensively, pretty much done nothing, really, other than get Kirk Cousins back, which is good, I guess. But yeah, I think we just got to see what they do in the draft, and obviously not a lot to go off of, but I certainly see some potential here with the moves that he's made so far. Not quite the Dave Ziegler offseason, but in that tier B where you look at it as positive and you look at it as trending in the right direction, and you look at it as so far making the team better, which is what your job is as the general manager. So not a lot of moves, but some moves that I do really like so far, so I think that he's doing a good job. Next up, we've got a guy that I will not have to go crazy over his name, Brian Gutekunst. I think that's how you say his name. I was just kidding about the pronunciation there. But this is the Green Bay Packers general manager. Everybody knows his name, probably doesn't know how to spell it. But he is the Green Bay Packers general manager, and of course we know that the Packers do not have an actual traditional owner, so this gives this man an unbelievable amount of power. So he is basically Aaron Rodgers' worst enemy, and somehow, some way, Aaron Rodgers is still on the team. What do I say about this guy? Okay, so here's what I'll say about Gutekunst, okay? So he does a good job drafting for the most part. I think when he does zero in on certain players, I look at some of the moves they've made in recent years of like Rashawn Gary, Jair Alexander, some of the signings like Zadarius Smith, even the A.J. Dillon, looking back at it, wasn't horrible. Offensive lineman, he's had some decent picks there. So I think he's done a pretty good job drafting. Darnell Savage was another pick that I liked. So his drafting has been pretty good, but then he's also had some bad moves. Like that 1 year alone is just bad enough for you to suggest that it's just like atrocious, right? Because Jordan Love was like the most unbelievable stupid pick of any general manager I've honestly ever seen. Like that was just stupid. I don't get it. And then you've got the reluctance to get a number 2 receiver, when I've been saying it for 18 years in a row that the Packers need a good number 2 receiver. And then you talk about just, I understand that Aaron Rodgers is a difficult guy to make happy, but it's not that hard. Just draft a receiver. So now the Davante Adams move might actually end up being a good one long term, but is that going to help you win right now with Aaron Rodgers? The answer is probably no. But if he nails these picks, then it could be great. So it's really up to him. If he gets the good side of some of his picks, then hey, he'll be good. If he gets the bad side, then we're going to be looking at him as an absolute failure as a general manager for the Green Bay Packers, because he was not able to surround Aaron Rodgers with that championship team quite enough. Even though the team has been good, they've had multiple All-Pros and all that stuff, and Rodgers hasn't held up his end as well. Trading away Davante Adams definitely goes in the opposite direction of trying to win right now. So he's got to answer for it, but it's really on his plate. He's got to do what he's got to do. So honestly, I don't think he's bad. I think he's okay. I have really disagreed with strongly some of his moves. I have not loved at times his lack of aggression in free agency, but at other times it's been good. And then his hit and miss in the draft, his weird strategy in the draft at times has thrown me off. But when he does go in a direction that makes sense, he usually hits on that draft pick. So I've got to give him proper credit. So I think he gets a bad reputation, but he's not quite as bad as his reputation would suggest. Ryan Poles is next for the Chicago Bears. He is brand new. So far, not so good in terms of just they've lost a lot of talent, but I understand. He's kind of somebody that's in a spot where he's having to basically work from the ground up and take apart a roster that is old and try to manufacture a team around a young quarterback, and he just isn't able to yet because of the cap situation and because of where the team has been and who's been running it and how that has been going. So because they were in such a bad spot before, Ryan Poles is getting the short end of the stick, so to speak. But I will put him in the potential category. He is brand new. He's not made a ton of moves so far. And I do think he's struggled to make any positive moves for the Bears this offseason. But I really want to see what he does in the draft. I want to see what he can do over the next 2 to 3 years. Like the next offseason is going to be huge for him. Can he put an offensive line and a team around Justin Fields? Maybe he's just bad, right? Maybe he's just bad and he doesn't have what it takes, but we don't really quite know yet, so I've got to put him in that potential category. Next up, we've got, I believe that's Brad Holmes of the Detroit Lions. Brad Holmes is... This one's interesting. I think so far, so good. Like, I don't think necessarily he's made any bad moves. he did the right thing in trading Matthew Stafford. I can't really blame him for that because Matthew Stafford kind of wanted to leave quietly, and they got good value back for him. They got good draft picks. They weren't trending in the right direction with Stafford, so yeah, Stafford ended up, it was just good for both, I think. Good for both parties. They got Jared Goff in return, who is a stable kind of like bridge quarterback, and he'll still be the starter this year. So, but he's had some nice draft picks. I think Sewell is good. I think St. Brown was a nice little steal of a pick. I think they've done a good job building the offensive line. Defensive line still needs some work, but they've done not a half bad job there either. I do like a couple of the value pickups that they've made, like Mike Hughes at corner and then also at wide receiver DJ Chark. I think they're very high upside moves that I liked a lot this free agency. Some of the draft picks, was he around? I don't know if he was around. No, I believe that was Patricia's regime with DeAndre Swift. But when you look at the roster for the Detroit Lions, I think they've got some semblance of a direction. They've been trying to intentionally build the line of scrimmage. They've been trying to wait on the quarterback until they've got a good semblance of a roster to put that young quarterback into, and I think they'll pass on a quarterback again. And there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think Holmes has shown some positive potential. I still think he is going to be in the potential category because it's still only his second year, but so far so good. I do really like what I've seen from the Lions, and I know I'm usually positive about the Lions, but I do think that this direction makes a lot more sense than where they were at previously. Obviously, he had to do a lot of work just to get them out of where they were, so hopefully that can happen soon. Next up, we've got Schneider of the Seattle Seahawks. John Schneider is somebody that is known for his craziness. I think that he's been inconsistent over the course of his career. In his earlier days with Pete Carroll, I think there was some good stuff. But in recent years, he has been really bad. The draft has been a place of misery for Seahawks fans in recent years. They have had horrific drafts. The offensive line, terrible picks. Secondary, none to speak of. Trading picks for Jamal Adams. Okay, that was dumb at the end of the day because he didn't, it wasn't worth it. 2 firsts, maybe a first for a safety, not 2. Defensive line still isn't solved. Russell was asking to get an offensive line for quite some time and never truly lived up to the billing. He's made some nice picks like DK Metcalf, but that's few and far between. Rashad Penny, running back in the first round, you see the downside to that with the injuries that he's had. And yeah, I think Russell Wilson has really carried this franchise. I honestly can't say many positive things of what he's been able to do in recent years. So I think he used to be a good general manager, but he has dropped all the way to being one of the worst general managers in the league. And this might be a hot take, but I think right now, I think you've got to put him in bad. You look at the draft resume recently for Schneider and for the Seahawks, and it has been so terrible. So maybe he can turn it around this year with the draft picks that they got for Russell Wilson, but that's going to take some time. So we'll see what happens, but man, they need to work on that team and that roster in Seattle because they have not been able to function with some younger talent and add younger talent for quite some time. And the free agency hasn't been much better either. And the trades, some of the trades have been atrocious. I mean, you just can't really get around it. The best move they maybe ever made was trading Frank Clark for a first-round pick, and then they therefore used that pick and kind of, I believe they missed on that pick. John Lynch is next. John Lynch is tough because obviously Kyle Shanahan is kind of co-GM with John Lynch. They heavily work together there. That's a heavy partnership. As Kyle has a big influence specifically on offensive players as you can tell. But defensively, Lynch has done a really good job, and if that is primarily his job looking at defense, I think he's done a really good job. I think Lynch is honestly, it's weird to look at a guy that was a former player and always, but he's actually one of the few that's been really good. I think Lynch is a great GM, honestly. Like, maybe part of it is Kyle being a great coach, but you look at what John Lynch has done with this roster, and besides trading DeForest Buckner and not Eric Armstead, I think every other move has been pretty good. The other one is Trey Lance, right? See, this is where you could maybe move John Lynch to good, right? Because depending on, and this will really decide John Lynch, because if John Lynch missed on Trey Lance, then that is gonna hurt them. But if he hit on Trey Lance, then that's good. So you know what? I'm gonna move him to good just because of that. Just because I don't know. And it's kind of leaning right now that Trey Lance wasn't exactly the best pick they could have made. So remembering that, I do feel like maybe great is a little bit much, but good makes sense because they've always been able to add quality under-the-radar defensive lineman pickups that have been home runs for them. Getting Nick Bosa was a great pick. Brandon Ayuk was a good pick. Deebo Samuel was a home run. Even somebody like Eli Mitchell was a good pick later in the draft. George Kittle was a great pick. Who else? Eric Armstead was there before. Thinking Fred Warner was a great pick, right? They have had one of the best rosters in the NFL since about 2019. So a lot of that has to do with John Lynch, especially the defensive side of the football. So I think he's done a very, very good job, but I can't put him in great because they kind of maybe missed on the quarterback, but maybe didn't. I don't know yet, so we'll see. Jimmy Garoppolo was actually a good trade because they did get Jimmy Garoppolo for a second, and at the end of the day, that was a great trade for them because Jimmy Garoppolo has been the starting quarterback for a Super Bowl team, a team that went to the Super Bowl, and a team that went to the NFC Championship. At the end of the day, that's a W. He beat Belichick on that one. Then we've got Les Snead. Snead is the F them picks guy from the Los Angeles Rams. And honestly, I think I've got to say that Les Snead is a superstar. And it's not really because he's always made great moves, but it's because he is a trendsetter right now. So that's kind of the way that I look at superstars a little bit in a way is you rather got to be just really, really darn good, or you've got to be setting absolute trends for your team and for the league. And Les Snead has been doing that. Trading draft picks for superstar talent and creating a roster with a bunch of superstars for his head coach. And then allowing Sean McVay to function with those superstars. Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, those guys are ridiculous, right? But Jalen Ramsey was a huge pickup for them. Getting Von Miller ultimately was a great trade. Getting Odell was a phenomenal pickup. Getting Cooper Kupp in the draft, great. Even, some of the offensive linemen, low-key moves that they've been able to replace year after year after year. Defensive guys that they've been able to replace year after year after year. Like, this has something to do with picking in the fourth round all the time and picking at least startable players. So I think Les Snead is a superstar because he's setting trends. He's setting the F them picks trend, which is absolutely superstar quality. Brad says Andrew Berry is S tier. I don't agree. I got him in potential, which I should probably move him from potential because he's had long enough in the league. So I'll put him in good instead of the potential tier. But yeah, he's not a superstar for sure because he has missed. The team's been good, but they've kind of disappointed in a couple of seasons here. And we'll see what he does with Deshaun Watson, if that works out or not. But I've got him in the good tier there. Now we've got Steve Keim from the Arizona Cardinals. I think Steve Keim obviously had a good pick with Kyler Murray. Besides that, good trade with DeAndre Hopkins. Everything else is highly iffy. DJ Humphries held him down, got him back. That's good. Offensive line's still kind of like, the Rodney Hudson pickup wasn't exactly the greatest so far. I think actually getting Zach Ertz last year was one of his better moves just from the value that he got. Re-signing James Conner was highly highly interesting. Defensively, Buda Baker was a nice pick. Byron Murphy maybe was a good pick. Like, I don't know. He hasn't had a great draft history. But he has got the best position down. Kyler Murray's a good player, and DeAndre Hopkins was a difference-making move. So some of the moves he's made have been good, but some of them have been misses. So I think he's okay. Honestly, I think he fits the description as an okay general manager. Then we've got Fontenot from the Atlanta Falcons, and he's also pretty new. So far, this is a team with not a lot of talent, and they've really not made a lot of moves overall. I think a lot of the moves that they've made have been familiar signings from schemes past of these former coaches, whether it's Dean Pease or it's Arthur Smith. He's tried to surround this culture with players that have played for these coaches before, and they're currently in the rebuilding process. I think his lack to trade Matt Ryan for better value, maybe even last year, was not good. What else happened? His offensive line, I mean, he's done an okay job so far, I guess you could say. Cordell Patterson was a good pickup. You definitely got to give him that. Kyle Pitts was a good pick, although it's not really going to move the dial that much. Wide receiver, Calvin Ridley, that whole situation, that was really difficult to handle there. Wide receiver, we'll see what they do in the draft, if they can fix that whatsoever. Defensively, they don't really have a lot of difference makers. He hasn't really added a ton there. I think it's been obviously short-lived. I'm going to say that he's potential just because he hasn't really done anything yet, and I just got to see what he does because he hasn't. I can't say he's bad because One Pride says I should put him in bad, but I can't say he's bad. I get it. Like, they're bad right now, but I don't think that's really all his fault. I need to see him do more before I can truly evaluate him, so I'm going to put him into potential. We've got Howie Roseman, who is perhaps the biggest character in of any of the general managers in the league. He's certainly a prototypical GM, and he has led the Eagles to a lot of success over the years. I think one of the areas where he has failed is assessing the Carson Wentz situation a little bit. But I think he did a great job countering it and understanding it a little bit by also drafting Jalen Hurts in the second round, which, when you look back at it, was one of the better second-round quarterback picks in recent history. And I know that's kind of sad to say, but it's true. And Jalen Hurts at least gives them a serviceable quarterback, if not one with a lot of potential moving forward. Offensive lines have always been strong with the Eagles, and he's a big reason for it. Defensive lines have always been strong. You do it once again with Hassan Reddick in the free agency pool this year. I love what he did with Fletcher Cox to be able to retain him. Devontae Smith, I think, was a good pickup and a great draft pick, even though they had to trade up for it. I thought it was wise. I think his decision to trade for a first-round pick next year instead of having 3 this year was also very wise. Obviously, he was able to build a great Super Bowl-worthy team and have Nick Foles win the Super Bowl, so that just speaks for itself. Typically, he makes great trades. Typically, the line of scrimmage is an area of strength. Some of the perimeter playmakers, like the receivers and the corners, have been somewhat misses at times, but Darius Slay, I thought, was a good pickup for them, and has been a good pickup for them. So he's been a little bit more inconsistent as of late. He was looked at as a superstar, but I think he's maybe moved down just a smidge. So I feel like he's a great general manager, and I still think he's doing a good job. But I don't know if he's quite at the top of the league like he was maybe 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So I'm going to go with great. Next, we have got the guy from Dallas, which I've actually got to recall his name because he's the player personnel guy. That's Will McClay. Will McClay is the player personnel guy of the Dallas Cowboys. Jerry Jones is actually the general manager, but McClay is the guy making most of the decisions, and Jerry Jones kind of signs off on it, or if he steps in, it's usually for the first pick in the draft, and that's about it. But Will McClay, I think, honestly, this offseason has maybe hurt his reputation a little bit because this offseason hasn't been his best. Looking at the trade of Amari Cooper, where I think it made sense to trade him and the contract, but they didn't get great value for him, so that's not the greatest. Letting Randy Gregory walk and kind of butchering that was tough to watch. Offensive line-wise, they've definitely regressed, and Collins left the building as well, and he hasn't really moved the dial in terms of making them a better team this year. But when you look at their draft picks, he's been really good for the most part. And his evaluation of talent and sometimes even low-key talent is really solid. So I feel like he is a good general manager or a good player personnel guy. So whatever way you want to say it. I think for the most part he's good, but I do think this offseason hurts his stock just a bit from the lack of moves for this team that could have competed in the NFC against the Bucs and the Rams of the world. Next, we've got 3 remaining here. If you guys haven't already, make sure you do Gronk spike the like button. Martin Mayhew of the Washington Commanders. I don't want to say football team, the Commanders. I got it right, baby. He is new, actually, as well. I'm just going to keep it plain and simple. I'm going to put him in potential. I am actually excited, though, that Washington is deciding to add a general manager instead of just having their dumb owner be the general manager, which has seriously hurt their success over the last 25, 30 years. So at least they have a general manager now who's going to make calculated decisions and educated decisions instead of what they had before. So that's all I'll say about that. Next up, second to last, we have the GM of the Giants, and that is Joe Schoen. I don't even know how to say his name. Shine? I want to say it's Shine, but he's also from Buffalo, and I think this is his first year as well. So he is a guy that studied under Brandon Beane and kind of learned from his approach, and then went with Brian Daboll to the Giants and was a big influence on hiring Brian Daboll, obviously. So they were kind of a package, kind of like Ziegler and McDaniels. So far, so good. I think what he's done so far is good, just adding to the offensive line. It sounds like Shane. Okay, thank you, Manny. I remember looking that up when I did the Giants video like a couple weeks ago, and then I guess I just forgot, but so Shane, I think that he's done a good job so far just adding to the offensive line. And I want to see what happens with Bradbury. I would like to see if they get any value there, if they trade him. I would honestly just keep him for the season, but I understand that they're kind of in a tough cap situation. He's following somebody that was really, really terrible at his job in Gettleman, so Gettleman made some nice moves, but he also made some really, really bad ones, and he put the team in some bad cap spots. But so far, there's not a lot to go off of other than the fact that he's building the offensive line, which is good because they haven't been able to do that for years. And the defense, we'll see what they do in the draft. I mean, there's not really a lot to be said. I definitely look at him as somebody that's promising, though, just because of where he comes from, just because he comes from Buffalo. And I think, like I said, Brandon Beane was that first superstar on this tier list. I think anybody coming from there right now has a real good grasp and understanding of where the NFL is and where it's moving and the positional value of certain positions and who to sign and who to draft and, how to correctly value these guys. So I think he's potentially a very good hire, and one of the guys in the potential column that I look at and say, you know what, they could have something with that, along with the partnership of Brian Daboll as the coach. So I like him in the potential tier there. And then last, but certainly not least, Turtles guy, Mr. New Orleans, Mickey Loomis. Mickey Loomis, I'm going to say this right now. Mickey Loomis is a superstar GM. Why is he a superstar GM? I don't know how they do it. This guy does not have a salary cap, okay? This guy does not function in the same NFL that everybody else functions in. He does not have a salary cap. It does not exist. He's a superstar. He does not care. He says, F that salary cap, like Les Snead says, F them picks. And by the way, the Saints have a great roster, and they've had a great roster for years. One of the best rosters for years. I don't know. He just ended up being at the bottom of the list, Turtle. But Mickey Loomis is a superstar because he is on a different plane of existence than everybody else in the NFL. And he does a great job drafting for the most part. Sometimes he gets a little bit overzealous with like trading up for Marcus Davenport, but mostly he does a good job drafting. Free agencies, I think he does a good job finding some values at times, especially like in the secondary. I would like to see them do a better job and him do a better job finding receivers. That's something that I want to see. He's always done a good job with offensive linemen. Defensive linemen as well has always been an area of strength, but quarterback's going to be the next thing that he has to assess and he has to get. And we've never really seen him do that yet. So we'll see how that goes. But now they've got 2 first-round picks. We'll see if they make a move for a quarterback or if they just continue to build this team. I could see them going offensive line. I could see them going defensive line. I could see them going defense. Yeah, Marcus Davenport is a good player. Don't get me wrong, but he wasn't worth all that they asked or all that they traded up to get, right? So I think he's really good, and I've got a lot of respect for the team he's been able to build over the years, and it's unfortunate that the team's never won the Super Bowl in the recent seasons, but he's done a really good job, and he's going to be there, obviously, after Sean Payton to hold it down and transition into that new era of Saints football. And like I said, the quarterback decision to follow Drew Brees, because it's obviously not going to be Jameis Winston. Although Jameis is a nice little bridge pickup, I feel like that is going to ultimately decide his legacy beyond just the Sean Payton guy. So Mickey Loomis is a superstar, and that is my tier of superstars. Brandon Beane, Jason Licht, Les Snead, and Mickey Loomis. And then we've got the great tier, Belichick, Ballard, Telesco, I forgot his name for a second, DeCosta, and Howie Roseman. And then the rest, a lot of the potential tier are the newer guys. So guys like Nick Caserio, guys like Dave Ziegler, those guys that haven't really had enough on their track record yet, although I wanted to put Dave Ziegler higher, I just couldn't yet. And then really there's not a lot of bad general managers. There's just, honestly, you know what I've learned from this tier list is it's really hard to make decisions in the NFL, and everyone's going to hit and everyone's going to miss. You know, no matter how good or bad you are, you're going to have some times where you hit and sometimes where you miss. It's just, can you consistently hit more than you miss? And can you hit at the important spots? Like a guy like Beane has done. Like a guy like Snead has done. Like a guy like Licht has done. So that is kind of like the big stuff there. But that is my GM tier list for 2022. I've never actually ranked GMs before, so I appreciate everybody tuning in and watching this video. Let me know your feedback and thoughts. This is the first time I've ever actually had a GM video on my channel, so I appreciate any feedback that you guys have about your individual GM, what you like about them, what you don't like about them. Let me know in the comment section below. Appreciate everybody watching, and we'll see you in the next tier list. Let's try to get to 100 likes once again for our next tier list, and let me know in the comments which tier list you would like that to be. It's Mitch. Thanks for watching. Peace.